The cursed cabin. Deep in the dense forests of Canada, there was a small, decrepit cabin that had long been the subject of fearful whispers among the nearby villagers. The cabin was infamous for the dark tales surrounding it. Tales of those who had entered but never returned. Locals believed it to be cursed, a place where sinister forces lurked, eager to ensnare anyone foolish enough to cross its threshold. Mazen and his friend Omar were both young adventurers, always seeking the next thrill, the next mystery to solve. They had heard the stories of the cursed cabin for years, but had dismissed them as superstitions, nothing more than tales to keep curious minds away. The very idea of a haunted cabin intrigued them, and as the kind of people who thrived on adrenaline, they decided to explore the cabin themselves. It was an opportunity they couldn't resist. One brisk autumn afternoon, they set out for the forest, eager to uncover the truth. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and little else, they trekked deep into the woods, following the vague directions provided by the villagers. The sky above grew darker as they moved farther from civilization, the thick canopy of trees blocking out the sun's fading light. After hours of walking, they finally reached the cabin. It was as the villagers had described, a small, weather-beaten structure that seemed to be crumbling under the weight of time. The wood was rotting, and the windows were shattered, their glass littering the ground like the remnants of long-forgotten lives. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, as if it had been forced open many times before. Mazen and Omar exchanged glances, their excitement briefly tempered by a surge of unease. Despite their bravado, the sight of the cabin, standing in eerie isolation, unsettled them. The silence of the forest around them was almost deafening, broken only by the rustle of the wind through the trees. "Well, here we are," Omar said with a forced smile. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." They stepped inside, cautiously. The interior of the cabin was even more dilapidated than the outside suggested. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and the wooden floor creaked ominously beneath their feet. Strange, unfamiliar symbols were scrawled on the walls in what appeared to be old, faded paint. Symbols that Mazen immediately recognized as some sort of ancient runes or occult markings. "Look at these," Mazen said, tracing one of the symbols with his finger. "I've never seen anything like them." Omar shrugged, unimpressed. "Probably just graffiti from other idiots who came here before us." As they explored further, an unsettling feeling crept over them both. It wasn't just the state of disrepair or the eerie symbols that made them uneasy. It was something deeper, something intangible. The air itself felt heavy, as though the cabin was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. They moved from room to room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The place seemed larger on the inside than it appeared from the outside, each room more claustrophobic than the last. Then from somewhere above them, they heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was as if something or someone was moving upstairs. Mazen and Omar froze, staring at each other in disbelief. "Did you hear that?" Omar whispered, his voice barely audible. Mazen nodded, his heart pounding. "I'm going to check it out. I'll stay down here," Omar said, clearly unnerved, "just in case." Mazen ascended the rickety staircase, each step groaning under his weight. The second floor was even darker, the narrow hallway leading to a single door at the far end. As he approached, the strange sound grew louder. It was a soft, rhythmic creaking, like the sound of a rocking chair slowly moving back and forth. Mazen's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what he expected to find behind the door. but every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn back. Ignoring the voice in his head, he pushed the door open. Inside, he found a small, sparsely furnished room. An old rusted bed frame sat in the center, with a filthy, moth-eaten blanket draped over what appeared to be a figure lying on the bed. The room reeked of rot, and the air was frigid, colder than it should have been. Mazen's breath came in short gasps as he slowly approached the bed. His flashlight flickered for a moment, casting long shadows across the room. With trembling hands, Mazen reached out and pulled the blanket back. What lay beneath nearly stopped his heart. It was the body of an old woman, her skin shriveled and decayed, her hair long and matted. Her eyes were closed, and she lay deathly still. For a brief second, Mazen thought she was just another long-dead victim of the cabin. But then, without warning, her eyes snapped open. Mazen staggered back, his mind reeling in terror. The old woman's eyes were wide, glowing faintly in the dim light, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, a smile that radiated pure malice. Her voice, cold and rasping, filled the room. "Welcome," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." Mazen's blood turned to ice. The room seemed to close in around him as the woman's voice echoed in his ears. He turned and fled, bolting down the stairs, his heart racing with fear. But as he reached the bottom, a new horror awaited him. Omar was gone. There was no sign of his friend anywhere. The room they had entered together was empty, as though Omar had never been there at all. Panic surged through Mazen's veins as he called out for him, but the only response was the oppressive silence of the cabin. Desperate, Mazen searched every corner of the house, but there was no trace of Omar. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. His mind raced with possibilities. Had Omar simply run outside? Or had something far worse happened? Mazen rushed to the door, ready to escape the nightmare he had found himself in. But when he stepped outside, the forest around him seemed to have changed. The cabin, once a decrepit ruin, now shimmered with an unnatural glow, its edges flickering, as though it were being erased from existence. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Mazen stood there, stunned, staring at the empty clearing where the cabin had stood just moments before. The structure had vanished, leaving behind only the cold wind and the dense trees. Shaken to his core, Mazen returned to the village, alone. He searched the forest for days, but there was no sign of the cursed cabin, no trace of Omar. The villagers listened in quiet horror as Mazen recounted his experience, but none of them were surprised. They had warned him, after all, warned him of the cabin's curse, of the dark force that claimed those who dared to enter. To this day, Mazen still searches for answers, haunted by the memory of that terrible night. Omar was never found, and the cursed cabin remains a legend whispered among the villagers, a tale of terror, a warning to those who think they can defy the supernatural. For Mazen, it is more than just a story. It is a living nightmare, one from which he may never truly escape.